Hi, and welcome back to the Save It for Parts channel. Recently I've noticed that one of my videos from a few years ago has gotten really popular, namely one where I'm tracking and downloading images from a Russian weather satellite. Now that particular satellite seems to have caught fire or exploded or run into something or had some other issue where it's no longer sending down images, at least not on a frequency that I can pick up. Fortunately, they've just launched another one this week, so we're going to try to pick that one up. And I haven't seen anyone else do this yet on YouTube. I'm sure somebody has, and by the time this video comes out, there will probably be a bunch of people that have done this. I've seen it on Reddit, I've seen some other people listening to it, so it's definitely out there. The hobbyist amateur satellite community is already listening to the thing, and people are already getting some imagery from it. Tracking these Russian weather satellites can be challenging, not just in a technical and looking up in the sky perspective, but even just from a naming convention perspective. The folks over at Roscosmos don't seem to be very imaginative, so they name all of these satellites Meteor 2. We've had a Meteor number 2, a Meteor number 2-2, a Meteor M number 2, a Meteor M number 2 1, Meteor M number 2 2, and this latest one that's just launched is Meteor M2 3. And it would be really hard to keep track of them all, except they seem to fail pretty quickly, so there only seems to ever be one that's working at a given time. The one I looked at in my previous video that a lot of people have commented on was Meteor M2 2. That one, like I said, seems to have collided with something or had a fire or had some other issue where it's no longer 100% operational. So the one we're trying to look at now is Meteor M2 3. Now, as usual, I'm using the website intuyo.com to track various space objects. I had to search on the website a little bit to find Meteor M2 3 because it's not in the list of commonly observed satellites yet. It's just too new. Once I clicked on that, I clicked on all passes and I get a list of upcoming passes. And if you click the map link, it shows you the path of the satellite relative to your position on the ground. So I have a couple options for detecting, recording, and processing the information from this new weather satellite. I could use my homemade cyber deck here, the Save It for Parts Sat Deck V1. That's exactly what this is designed for, listening to satellites up in space, listening to interesting radio signals, doing other stuff with them. It's kind of made out of garbage. It uses Linux. It's got a bunch of RTL SDR stuff built in. I've got a couple of videos on this one. Now I also happen to have another Linux system up on my roof. I have a Raspberry Pi up there with a QFH antenna and a linear amplifier filter unit specifically designed to listen to weather satellites. That's running a program called Raspberry Noah V2, which kind of does everything automatically. It figures out the satellite orbits, it sets up the recording at the specific times when the satellites come over, it processes the data, it gives me a web page showing all the captures, showing different bands, showing different image processing stuff. It's really handy. I'll throw a link down in the description below, as I usually do. Now, the problem with using that particular software package is it hasn't been updated yet to know anything about the newest Meteor M2-3. So it doesn't know the orbital parameters, it doesn't know the timing, it hasn't set up the recording for when that passes overhead. Right now I think it's also set up to record a NOAA satellite that's coming over in a similar time slot. So if I want to use that system, I'm going to have to log into it remotely on a console, maybe disable the Raspberry Noah package so it's not trying to run at the same time. What I'm thinking I'm going to do is make things harder for myself and do both ways at once. We're going to try to console into the Raspberry Pi up on the roof, set that up to record using the QFH antenna, because that's the best antenna that I have for this frequency range, for this type of satellite. And that's a homemade antenna made out of plumbing parts. I've showed that in previous videos. I'll throw some links to that down in the description if you want to make one of these for yourself. Now I'm also going to use the cyber deck for the same pass. So I want to see what the spectrum looks like, what the signal looks like as the satellite goes overhead. I won't get as good of a signal because I'll just be using the little V-dipole rabbit ears that come with the RTL SDR kit. Alright, that's probably far more than enough of me talking. Let's get to some computer stuff. Alright, I think I'm starting to get a little bit of a signal here. These are sun-synchronous satellites, so they usually come across early in the morning and late in the evening, which in the summer means that the sunlight is kind of directly on your screen if you're working with them outside. So on the Pi, I'm going to be trying a bash script called RTL SDR Recorder. It seems like it output an intermediate file, a raw file from the SDR, but it didn't do the rest of the processing, so I'm not quite sure if I can use that raw file, if I can run it through some more scripts and commands and get something out of it. That's always the problem with using an unfamiliar script from the internet. if you screw it up, if you don't use it quite right, especially for a time-sensitive operation like this, I'm not going to have another chance to try it for 12 hours or so until that satellite comes back overhead. So we've got our raw data file, which actually filled up the SD card on the Raspberry Pi, so it was just barely running, but I think we got the whole thing. I've moved that over to my other Linux computer so we can try to process it. Now we could run it through SOX and all that math stuff like we did in the last video, but there's apparently this new program that's come out in the meantime called SatDump. Ah yes, here's the most thrilling part of any of my videos, when we get to watch a bunch of random Linux code happening. Smash that like and subscribe button if you want to see more things compiling. Well, it's definitely trying to process it, but I don't think we're getting much yet. If we were getting a good decode, I think that fuzzy ball in the upper left there would break up into 4 fuzzy balls. Alright, I can't make heads or tails of that raw file I got from the Raspberry Pi. I think that just didn't work, so we're going to go back to the method that I used in the previous video and try to apply that to the WAV file I recorded from GQRX on the Cyberdeck. And it seems like this isn't working either. I'm supposed to get an output PNG file, but nothing's coming out. Alright, this is attempt number 4, I think. We're trying to record manually on the Raspberry Pi, and then once we have that raw IQ recording, we can run it through some other processes. We're near the middle of the pass right now, so hopefully we're getting the strongest signal from this satellite. So we have our raw IQ file from that pass, and I can't do anything with it in its current format, so we're going to run SOX on that to turn it into a WAV file. I'll grab the WAV file off the Pi and FTP it over to my desktop. And then we're going to try SatDump one more time on this latest WAV file. Now we're definitely getting those 4 splits towards the middle of the pass, so that's looking very promising. So we have some little strips of imagery here that came through. Okay, so we gave SatDump one more try with a couple different parameters. We've enabled DC blocking, and we've set the frequency shift to 1. So now, after we've processed that, we actually have more of an image. And it's a recognizable image. I can see the tip of Lake Superior here. That's not great, but it's not terrible, and the image quality is definitely higher than the NOAA satellites. The other cool thing about this image is you can actually see the curvature of the Earth. So the satellite came across right down the center here. Everything in the center looks flat. But if you look off to the right, Lake Erie and Lake Ontario look really distorted. That's because we're seeing them on edge. We're seeing them basically looking around the curvature of the Earth, so they're curving away from us there. You get the same effect on the left in North and South Dakota, but there's nothing interesting over there, so it just looks flat either way. The signal wasn't as good up over Hudson's Bay, but it was good enough that you can see some color variations in the seawater. That lighter blue stuff might be silt, or it might be different temperatures. That's kind of cool. And this suspicious bluish cloud might be some of the wildfire smoke that's been coming off of Canada recently, so we could track that coming towards us if we wanted to. Alright, we're trying this one more time, again with some slightly different parameters for the RTL-FM command. Well, so far that looks worse. It's got way more missing lines of data. So I still don't understand how to properly use SatDump. It seems like every time I run it, it outputs a slightly different image with different bands of missing data. So I just ran it 8 times in a row with slightly different settings for the frequency shift and DC blocking and IQ swap. I stacked all those outputs into GIMP image editor, removed the black zones, and now we have this image. It looks like the raw data is coming through in that IQ recording and that WAV file, but for whatever reason, SatDump can't seem to process it all in one go. Just out of curiosity, I ran SatDump one more time on my Linux desktop, and it came out much better on Linux than on Windows, so maybe someone in the comments can tell me how to do this better, or maybe the developer of SatDump is still working on it. Again, this is a brand new satellite launched less than a week ago, so I expect some of these tools and utilities to evolve as people get more familiar with it. But for now, I think this is a good first try. It seems like it's kind of working. I'm able to get stuff right off of that brand new Russian Meteor M23 satellite, which is pretty cool. If you want to follow along and try this yourself, I will put all of the Linux commands that I used down in the description, as well as links to all the software I used. If you have a better way to do this, please let me know in the comments, or shoot me a link to somebody else that's done this better, and I would love to try that for myself. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.